Hi, I'm Kyle McLaughlin, and I'm excited to welcome you to the Chihuly Garden and Glass Exhibition. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I was fortunate to be inspired by the arts at an early age and personally believe that they are a vital pillar in the communities that they serve. Here in the Emerald City, Seattle Center Campus is the gathering place that has long provided visitors and residents alike a foundation in the arts. Home to the Seattle Opera, Symphony, and Ballet, the Seattle International Film Festival, the Seattle Repertory and Children's Theaters, the arts thrive at the center of this city. And the addition of Chihuly Garden and Glass now brings representation for the visual arts from one of the region's best-known artists.
These are just simple shapes that were gathered up out of the furnace in a white glass and just went up on a ladder and simply let the glass drop down, and that sort of puddles out. We induced neon inside the pieces, so it was technically a little complicated, and that was back at a time when artists were very interested in working with technology and new things. It was a period from around the late 60s to the early 70s.
I think it was about 1977 that I was visiting the Washington State Historical Society with Italo Skanga and Jamie Carpenter, and we were looking at their Indian basket collection. And then it dawns on me that, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to try to make these baskets out of glass? A lot of the baskets are old and kind of crumply, and they're not always straight and firm. So I got into my mind that somehow I wanted to make them asymmetrical. First, I would bang them with a paddle to beat them up a little bit, but I soon learned that if I just used the heat of the furnace and the fire, that I could get the same kind of movement from the fire itself, and it was more beautiful. That was really the breakthrough series for me, to begin to form glass with fire, with gravity, with heat, with centrifugal force. I was using just human breath going down into this miraculous material, blowing it up and then blowing it more and more, pushing its limits, making it as thin as I could, and getting it so hot that it would almost collapse and begin to move. And I was pushing the edge of thinness and collapsibility and making new forms.
If you look closely at the glass baskets and pay attention to the detailed drawings on the baskets, then look at the trade blankets, you'll see a remarkable similarity in forms, in colors, in textures. Dale realized that he could make glass vessels that mimic that and used his ability to make patterns on the glass that reflected the weaving and the patterns from various Native American cultures, and used that as a spark for his career.
I've made a sea life tower 20 feet high, and it includes a lot of sea creatures in hopes that people will enjoy identifying them.
All of the elements on the Sea Life Tower reflect Dale's profound understanding of the properties of glass, of its fluidity, of how it moves like water, and the kelp-like elements that are moving on the tower, the creatures that are moving through the currents of the water. All of this are reflected by the way molten glass moves in the hot shop, by the way gravity pulls it, by the way the glass blowers twist and turn and let glass flow as it's supposed to.
I made the Sea Life Tower to show how important the water is to my work. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did making it. The Persian series started out with my interest in Persian glass and Roman glass, Egyptian glass, and my good friend Martin Blank came to Pilchuck, got him a little crew, and he and that crew worked off on the side from where we were working, creating sort of miniature small pieces that I could later elaborate on and try to see what I could make from it.
Originally, the Persian series started out as an exploration of pattern and color. They began to morph from sea forms to characters that might live inside these shells. Lots of weird snooters and tips and pulls and pokes. My role with Dale was to experiment and come up with new forms. It's a very challenging dance to create a true Persian because when you're working glass, you're fighting that edge of being in control and out of control. And it's very poignant when you're creating a Persian because you have to get the glass so hot that it wants to spin out and destroy itself by getting too thin, or not hot enough and be a boring round plate.
In creating the Persian ceiling, I was trying to make something that people had never seen before. So you walk under there and you look up, and all of a sudden you have to start figuring out what you're looking at and what is it and how does it make you feel. And I like to make people feel good. I've been inspired by so many things, one of which was growing up in a garden that my mother had. She had beautiful rhododendrons and azaleas, and I would get to play in the garden and be around all these beautiful natural forms. It also had a big influence on me, I think, in terms of color. Many of the installations are on black plexiglass, a reflective surface. I love to work with reflective materials. It gives a totally different dimension to the work, and the perspective changes as you move around the piece.
The first time I've seen Mille Fiori at Tacoma Art Museum in 2003 was an amazing experience. I drove down to Tacoma with a lot of expectations, but I think the experience of entering the room was beyond my expectations. There was these explosions of colors, primary colors, yellow, blue, red, and forms. These forms were clearly natural. They were organic, but they were not imitations of natural life. They seemed to have a life of their own.
The forms have been inspired about work that I've done in Finland at Nutijärvi, in Ireland at Waterford Crystal, in Monterrey, Mexico. It's a series that's made up of maybe 15 or 20 different forms.
Mille Fiori has an interesting title for me, being Italian. Mille Fiori in Italy means 1,000 flowers. The reference actually is not directly to gardening, but rather to a type of honey. It's that time of the year when the bees are not collecting pollen only from one type of flowers, but from many flowers, 1,000 flowers. I found very fascinating the references of Dale's work to, in the title, to Mille Fiori, to the honey, because I felt that these spears and tender-like forms that he had created in these primary colors were referencing the organic, viscous forms of honey as into to nature and to life forms.
It also has a lot to do with the process of glass blowing, experimenting with forms in the way that I like to work and sort of develop new forms. Often they seem to look like they should be in nature. So it's a combination of the glass blowing process and inspired by places that I've visited over the years. I've always loved the water. I was raised in Tacoma, Washington, on the water in the Pacific Northwest, and as a little kid, we'd beach comb and find Japanese fishing floats. And when we went to Finland, I had an opportunity to throw the glass into the water, and then we'd retrieve the glass in these Finnish rowboats like you see here.
The Ikebana and float boats that you're looking at here in this installation were inspired by Dale's experience in Nutijärvi, Finland in the mid-1990s. And while he was there, he got it in his head to throw his large glass forms off a little bridge into the local river near the glass factory there. Local teenagers would pick them up, put them into little rowboats, bring them back to the shore, and Dale would take them out and check them in again. And this went on for some time, and he really liked the way his glass looked in these wooden boats. It's really, I think, one of his more successful installations. It just evokes all kinds of imagery in people's minds and delights them tremendously.
I woke up one morning and said, I want to hang chandeliers over the canals of Venice, my favorite city. And I probably took that to extreme with the Chandelier Series, which I started in 1992 with the Seattle Art Museum. There was a spot in the exhibition that wasn't working very well, and 10 days before the show opened, I decided to make a chandelier. And I had seen a chandelier in Barcelona a few months before when I was traveling in a restaurant, and there was a chandelier hanging at eye level because it had a low ceiling, and it was really beautiful. So you looked underneath the chandelier when you were sitting down, and it acted as sort of a centerpiece for the table. I love this idea of hanging a chandelier at eye level, and it triggered something that said, I now can make a chandelier because it doesn't have to be functional. So I made a chandelier for the Seattle Art Museum that looked sort of like yellow balloons, and it was made up of about 500 parts, very simple forms that a beginning glassblower could make almost. But we did it quickly. We did it in the 10-day period, put a couple of teams of glassblowers on it, and we hung it there. It probably weighed 500 or 1,000 pounds. And that began the Chandelier Series.
In Dale's case, he's a wonderful combination of amazing deliberation and incredible spontaneity. And so we decided to create a series of installations. The first time it had ever really been done to look at Dale's work through the guise of him as an installation artist, not necessarily an object maker. And it was a sort of a new way, even for Dale, I think, to look at his work. And of course, it was sort of transformative for him because he's become an artist who's incredibly well known for his large-scale, epic installations. A few days before the exhibition opened, Dale felt the show needed just, quote-unquote, something more. He decided that the show needed another element, an element that really would stress the ceiling. So much of the walls and the floor spaces of the institution were transformed by the show that he did, that he really wanted to think about what he could do on the ceiling. So he created a group of hanging works, which we really realized were kind of wildly Baroque chandeliers. And so the Chandelier Series was born.
It was the late 70s when we first found the German colors, that is, the German manufacturers of colored glass that was primarily produced for the stained glass industry, and we were able to incorporate it into our use for making studio glass here in America. And up to that point, we had all made our own colors ourselves, and so consequently it was rather rudimentary, not a very big palette of colors to work with. And all of a sudden, boom, there was like 300 or 400 colors that became available. And I think, the excitement of all of a sudden having this huge palette to work with was an incredible thing. And Dale just had this idea, I want to capitalize on this and put all this color to use. And so hence the concept or idea for the Macchias came along.
I guess I woke up with the idea that I would work with all 300 colors that were available to us that we bought from Germany. So I put one color on the inside, then a translucent or opaque white in the middle, and then another color on the outside. Because these white was put on as big chunks of white to give it more texture and variety, they ended up looking like clouds. And one day, somebody's writing an article about me, and they said, well, what about this new series? And I said, well, right now I'm calling this series The Uglies, because my mother said they were ugly, and she called them The Uglies. But I said, I don't suppose that'll do for a name for the series. So I called up my good friend Italo Scanga, who's Italian. And I said, Italo, I got to have a name for this series. They're spotted because of these spotted clouds and spotted exterior. And I said, what's the word spotted for Italian? And Italo said, I can't remember. He says, I'll look it up in the Italian dictionary. And he called me back and said, spotted is macchia.
The lovely garden that we've designed is about 26,000 square feet. And I worked with Richard to design the landscaping around the several installations. There's a yellow-green tower, there's a red tower, there's neodymium reeds, there's blue fiore. It's an interesting way to work to be able to have the landscape come in second, really, after the glass work.
Then once they decided what pieces they were going to use in the garden, then they started talking about which colors. Color is a big factor and what plants we chose, what flower colors were chosen to complement the art.
We've got the yellow sun elevated up in front of the glass house. We've got the red Mexican hat tower, the green icicle tower, the pink polyvitro tower. All the reeds that you see in the garden, the blue ones, the red, the neodymium, lavender pieces, all of those are made in a little glass factory in Nuutijärvi, Finland.
When you look at the glass reeds and many of the other outrageously tall and crazy forms that are in front of you, it took a special place to be able to create those pieces, and we just don't have that kind of a place here in Seattle, but there is a place. It's in Nuutijärvi, Finland. And the reason that we can do it there is because the ceilings in the factory are extremely high. They're 25 feet tall. Plus, the colors that they make there are not like anywhere else in the world. And every so often, the Chihuly team has gone to Finland to work with a group of Finnish glass blowers and art students and administrators in this little factory way out in the middle of nowhere. And we'd be in there making these reeds, or these sakuros, as they were called, or seal pups, or many, many things that we just didn't really have all those combinations of colored glass that's in the furnace and these big ovens that we could put them into, where within 2 hours after making an object, it would come out slow-cooled and processed, come out the other end to take back to an installation like you see in front of you now.
The arced shape was one that Dale was very interested in adopting because it was what all the traditional conservatories from the 19th century had, but the asymmetrical shape was one that evolved through a study of what seemed to be best for this particular site, where we have this amazing force of the Space Needle on the one hand and the other major architecture of the center and the surroundings.
I love the idea of being able to make the glass house and also make what's going to be inside it sort of at the same time. So you have a perfect control over the building and the artwork that goes inside it. And I made just one gigantic piece of sculpture to go inside that's 100 feet long and 25 feet high, mostly from reds, yellows, and oranges. It's designed to fill up the glass house, but yet to leave a lot of negative space as well, and to be able to reflect back into the surface because of this beautiful glass structure.